I think, very safely that the medical household will have enjoyed from travelling down to London for the appointment of the new Prime Minister, or whether there is and has been some underlying condition that they have never actually described or shared with us, as must be the suspicion, I think, but we do not know because, quite rightly, the Queen's health is regarded as a matter of which is due patient confidentiality and which is entitled to patient confidentiality and which is essentially a private matter. Yeah. So that, you know, is the situation. The other members of the family have arrived. We saw them sweeping into Balmoral just a few moments ago, and we just await whatever further news may emerge. And I stress the word may, because there is no sign at this point of anything further from Buckingham Palace, but that could clearly break just at any moment and change at any moment.
Indeed, it could. Pictures on the left there, the estate at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire, where doctors are concerned for the health of the Queen. Members of her family have arrived on an RAF plane in the last hour and a half, and they travelled the 40 or so miles over to Balmoral from the airport, and they've just arrived in the last 15-20 minutes or so. Some of the comings and goings there at Balmoral, and of course, Nick, over the last couple of engagements, I think it can be said we've seen the Queen using a walking stick.
Yeah, well, we first saw that actually last September, I think it was, after she early October, after she returned from Balmoral last year, and it was actually at Westminster Abbey at a service marking the centenary of the Royal British Legion that we saw her using a walking stick for the first time in public. And she was then in Cardiff for the an event at the Welsh Parliament, and it was just after that, those two engagements, when everything seemed to be all right, albeit that she had a stick. It was then on October the 20th that something changed, because that was the day when they cancelled her visit to Northern Ireland at very short notice and put out a statement to say that she had been advised by her doctors to rest. And she was then brought into the King Edward VII Hospital in London for some tests for a preliminary investigation. We were never told what that was all about. Okay, again, patient confidentiality. You remember the palace tried to bring her into hospital without making a public statement about it. It emerged the following day that she'd been in and kept overnight. And that was the moment at which something changed. It's been suggested that perhaps she had a fall, or we don't know. And fair enough. I mean, that is all private and so on. But since then, there has been a significant weight loss, and we have seen much, much less of her. She has missed these significant events, and I sense that there has been just a gradual deterioration in her health. Nothing certainly until today, nothing sudden, but she has looked more and more frail, and I think by consensus she looked pretty frail in the photograph of her with Liz Truss on Tuesday.
Indeed. Okay. Nick, thank you. Nick Witchell, our royal correspondent, who's been keeping us up to date with developments throughout the day. And I think we can go now to our royal correspondent, Helena Wilkinson, who's live at Windsor. Helena, it seems the sun has crept out where you are. It's lashing it down at Buckingham Palace, lashing it down in Scotland. Does that suggest that perhaps there may be a few more people outside where you are wanting to know what's going on?
Yeah, it was pouring with rain earlier here, Clive, sorry, but the residents in Windsor, we've spoken to a number of locals on the high street who have been emotional on hearing the news about the Queen's health. Some people have met the Queen. We spoke to one woman who heard the news and came from West London, about half an hour away. She wanted to be here outside the castle. Windsor Castle, of course, is one of the Queen's favourite royal residences. She spent most of the last 2.5 years or so here, since the COVID pandemic, the first lockdown. She spent the time here with her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. So she holds the castle very dear to her, and it's a place that she very much likes to be. She left here, of course, in July to go to Balmoral, which is what she traditionally does to spend her summer months there. And traditionally she would return to Windsor Castle in October. But the feeling you get here in Windsor, having spoken to locals and also tourists as well who are emerging from the gates here at Windsor Castle, is one of concern, one of anxiety about the Queen, and also people are just wanting to know exactly how she is. I think it's worth repeating that statement that we had from the palace earlier on today, that statement which we got at just after 12:30 this afternoon. That statement said that following further evaluation this morning, the Queen's doctors are concerned for Her Majesty's health and have recommended she remain under medical supervision. The statement went on to say the Queen remains comfortable and at Balmoral. But we know from previous experience that the palace often don't give a running commentary. They don't issue statements about the Queen's health, as Nick was just mentioning, because they very much regard those matters as private matters. So for them to issue that statement, doctors concerned about the Queen's health, she is comfortable, that statement said earlier on today. But if you add to that what we've seen very quickly after that statement, immediate members of the royal family travelling to Balmoral to see the Queen, I think if you add those two together, it just gives you a sense of the concern about how the Queen is. In terms of those who are going to Balmoral, members of the royal family, the Duke of Cambridge is one of them. He and his family recently moved here to Windsor, about a mile away or so from Windsor Castle. Their children, their 3 children, started at a new school in Berkshire, their first full day today, and we saw pictures this morning of the children arriving at their new school. We understand that the Duchess of Cambridge has not travelled with her husband, the Duke of Cambridge. Instead, she is staying here in Windsor. Not surprising, given that their children have started their first full day, and she will no doubt want to be with them. But yes, there is concern, anxiety, not just tourists but also locals here who regard the Queen very much as a resident, very much as one of their neighbours.
Helena, thank you very much. Helena Wilkinson there for us with the latest at Windsor, just reflecting the fact there that a few more people gathering there at Windsor. Now, we mentioned some of the arrivals at Balmoral. Take a look at this image. We've just been sent this image of the Duke of York and we think it's the Earl of Wessex, yes, in the same vehicle speeding towards Balmoral. What do we make of that, Nick?
Gosh, well, that's a question, isn't it? I'm not going to respond to that, Hugh, because I think it is impossible to read anything into that photograph. They look sombre.
Yes.
But they would
yes.
be sombre, given that we know that there is serious concern about their mother's health. It would be odd if they looked anything other than serious, but there is nothing much else that one could read into that. Duke of York in the front there, the Earl of Wessex, and one must presume that the Countess of Wessex is in the back beside Prince Edward there.
What struck me really, Nick, in looking at it and in asking the question really is it's a powerful image. It's an image that conveys solemnity. It conveys, I suppose, a sense of purpose and determination to get to Balmoral as soon as they can. And it speaks volumes as well about a family and children who are concerned about their mother.
And that is a very, very important point, that amidst the concern of the nation and of others elsewhere in the world, we shouldn't forget that at the heart of this is a family. That the 2 people we can see in that photograph there are visiting their 96-year-old mother To them, she is their mother. She's Queen, yes. But this is a moment of concern and possibly of anguish for the family, for the 4 children, for the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, and the wider family. And one must assume that that wider family is rather more appraised of the real situation than we are at the moment. But those immediate members of the family, the 4 children and the Duke of Cambridge, are now inside Balmoral Castle, so they will be talking to the doctors and they will be being brought up to date on what is happening.
One notable absence we understand right now, it's the Duke of Sussex, who we don't think has arrived yet.
No, well, there's certainly been no evidence, but that sort of begs the question as to how he is travelling. Significant, perhaps, that he's not or wasn't travelling with the other members of the family on that aircraft that we saw landing at Aberdeen Airport. Perhaps he was on the scheduled flight, which I think was arriving there not so long ago, or perhaps he's got his own aircraft. Who knows? But again, you know, all those matters really, I think, we put to one side at this point, because above all, he is visiting a beloved grandmother, and there was a good, special relationship between the Queen and Harry. He made much of it, didn't he, in those comments that he made some months ago. And yes, it reminds us once again that at the heart of this is a family which is coming to terms with an illness or a change in condition or whatever.
And there'll be families and individuals all around the UK and indeed around the Commonwealth and the world who will be able to understand perfectly the intensity of anxiety and the stress and the worry that comes with this.
Well, yes, because as we've been saying this afternoon, millions of people will feel a personal sense of concern that, OK, it's not their family, but that's the whole thing about a monarch. They somehow reflect the feelings within the society at the top of which they sit, that they are a reflection of all of our hopes or desires or sadnesses or anxieties, that we do identify with them. Not everybody, we know that, but we do identify with them, and in particular with somebody who has, as we've been saying, been there in the background to our lives, for most of us, for all of our lives. This person who has always been there, this reassuring, comforting figure, source of unity and stability and continuity and all those big thoughts. But also it's this lady who has been there, this sort of matriarchal figure as she's become in recent years. And I think the majority of people of this nation do identify with her, do feel keenly and sharply for her health, for her well-being, and many millions of people will be greatly concerned at this point.
They'll be looking at these images of the entrance to the Balmoral estate, and lots of British people, of course, will be familiar with the name Balmoral and the fact that it is a great Scottish estate that the Queen has been very closely associated with over the years. But of course, beyond Britain, across the Commonwealth and indeed around the world where these images will be transmitted today, it's worth underlining that the Queen has been on the world stage. She's been a prominent figure on the world stage, just in terms of statesmanship, just in terms of her unique position as a constitutional monarch and what she represents. And that is, again, something that we could reflect on today, which is the fact that there will be millions and millions of people around the world who've never been to the United Kingdom, who will be interested and exercised by what's happening to the Queen and the family today.
That's right. She is a global figure, as one of our guests earlier said. Now, that expresses itself most particularly through the Commonwealth, this coalition of nations and the subject which is very close to her heart and in which she has exercised a real role as head of the Commonwealth. That did give her a sort of diplomatic platform that, given the political constraints as Queen of the United Kingdom, she didn't have. But I think the other thing that we consider is what she has stood for, what she has represented. She has stood for decency and tolerance, and she's been dutiful and steadfast and all those other things. And so many other heads of state, I think, have recognised those qualities in her, and they have admired them, and they have admired the way she has conducted herself over 70 years with putting barely a foot wrong. And I think, you know, at international meetings, many of these foreign heads of state, they come, and the first thing they want to do is meet the Queen, because she's become such a historical figure, a figure, you know, who does represent so much that is decent and right.
Different perspective on the image we saw just a few moments ago, Nick, and this is the Duke of Cambridge actually driving the vehicle, where we saw the Duke of York there in the passenger seat and the Earl of Wessex in the back. But that's William driving them. So just gives you another little perspective on the journey from Aberdeen to Balmoral. And can imagine that was a fairly intense journey, really.
So these are really private family moments, aren't there? So one imagines, we can't see for certain, that the four people in that vehicle, I'm assuming that this is the Duke of York that we can see closest to us, as you say, the Duke of Cambridge, and then in the back, the Wessex, the Essexes, the Earl and Countess of Wessex. So no protection officers, no officials, just the four members of the family driving together, reflecting, one must imagine, together on whatever the situation is.
And there we see the four of them.
Yes.
It's a clearer picture there, isn't it? So William and then Prince Andrew and then Prince Edward, and then it's the Countess of Wessex there in the other seat in the back, isn't it? Underlining
that this is, above all for them, a family moment. And they will have wanted, I'm sure, to have been just alone amongst themselves in the family group, the four of them. And my goodness, OK, we are aware of the difficulties that have surrounded the Duke of York. And Prince William has been quite vociferous in his views on that, and has taken quite a leading part in ensuring that the Duke of York has withdrawn from public life. But again, I think this is not the moment for those issues.
No. Well, by now, they'll be in Balmoral Castle, and as you were saying, Nick, one imagines that they will by now have had a full briefing from the medical team there, that they will be aware of the situation. One imagines that they would be possibly at the bedside. The Queen is being treated and she's in a comfortable state, we were told earlier on. So we're trying to imagine the scene where, you know, the closest members of the family are with Her Majesty.
And they will be there with Prince Charles, who is the senior member of the royal family, other than the Queen, of course, but who in this situation with the Queen, if we say incapacitated, I mean simply that she is sufficiently unwell for doctors to be concerned and for her to be, as we keep saying, comfortable at Balmoral. But I think that this is a situation in which Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, will be, if not taking charge, then sort of taking the lead in the family's consultation amongst themselves. And there will be a number of things that they will need to think about, because if the Queen is, to some extent, incapacitated or less able than she has been to fulfil the role of head of state, that has implications, particularly obviously for Charles and for the councillors of state, one of whom is still Prince Andrew. You know? But anyway, that's again another issue. But there are, aside from the family issues, the concern and so on, there are other issues that they and their officials will be just considering.
Well, we mentioned there the fact that, of course, the medical team will be briefing the royal family members who've just arrived. So why don't we have a quick word again with our medical editor, Fergus Walsh. And Fergus, there will be people watching. Some of them will know quite a bit about the medical world, others not. Wondering what it means that, for example, the Queen is being kept comfortable and as comfortable as possible at Balmoral. There's no mention of new treatment or further treatment or a different kind of intervention, let's say at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, which is the closest hospital, and people will read things into that. What guidance would you give?
I think it's worth saying, Hugh, that the Queen has her own team of medics. The royal household has its own team, led by the physician to the Queen, Professor Sir Hugh Thomas. That's a role, a physician to the monarch, that stretches back at least to Henry VIII. And he is also head of the medical household. That's a title that was created back in 1973. Now, that statement that we have had, that brief statement, unprecedented, that the Queen's doctors were concerned for Her Majesty's health, but that she was comfortable, is all really that we have to go on, but unprecedented because it's not the sort of statement that we've ever been given before. Because, of course, as you and Nick have been saying, and other commentators and guests have been saying, we have been used to, all of us, been brought up and lived our lives with the Queen as head of state. 15 prime ministers have served under her. The first one, Winston Churchill, born back in 1874. The last to be appointed this week, Liz Truss, born 101 years later. And it is that continuity, and she has been in such robust good health for most of her life. So it is that decline that we have seen last year. Last October, she began using a walking stick in public. We've had these mobility issues. And then, although she did look very engaged in the photos with Liz Truss earlier this week, she did look frail and, as Nick said earlier, did seem to have lost quite a lot of weight.
Yes, indeed. There was a lot of focusing on the image itself, Fergus. When we talk about the kind of care that the Queen is getting, obviously an extremely high standard of care with some of the top experts in the country, indeed in some cases in the world, led by Sir Hugh Thomas, there'll be clearly a view on whether it's a normal process to allow the Queen to stay at home, in effect, in Balmoral, rather than look for maybe a more specialist unit elsewhere. Are people wrong to read things into that, or do you think that's perfectly understandable?
I think it's perfectly understandable, and in one sense, it's no different from what you would have with any 96-year-old who has fallen ill and is comfortable at home and able to be kept comfortable. If there was any treatment in a specialist unit that her medical team and her family would deem could help the Queen, as with any other patient, I'm sure that treatment would be given. But it's been decided that she's comfortable. Her family are gathered around her at what is a very difficult time, and we obviously await updates. We know no more officially or unofficially than we've been told in that statement.
Fergus, many thanks again for helping us out with that and some of the questions about the kind of care that the Queen is getting. Buckingham Palace there for you in all its splendour, with the internal quadrangle and then the forecourt, and then the gardens to the side and to the back. It's a very familiar sight, and the crowds there gathering, starting to gather anyway, despite some of the weather problems. And of course they're facing the famous balcony right in the centre of the facade, the balcony where the Queen has appeared on so many occasions since she first appeared as a girl with her parents back in the 1930s, late 30s, early 40s indeed. And of course the very famous images of the royal family on that balcony at the end of the Second World War, with her father, the King George VI, really hugely popular monarch by that point, having really given leadership with his wife, the Queen Mother, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother, throughout those wartime years. So there are a lot of memories there for the Queen herself, notwithstanding, of course, the fact that she's been on the balcony as monarch herself for the past 70 years or so, and those great occasions for the Golden Jubilee and the Platinum Jubilee, and back to 1977, the Diamond Jubilee, where we've seen millions of people crowding into this space at the end of the Mall and around the memorial to greet members of the royal family. So it's very much the symbol of royalty in London. There are lots of symbols of royalty in London, but Buckingham Palace, surely, with its balcony and its very famous facade, and very often, of course, with the sovereign standard flying when the Queen is in residence. It is the place that millions of tourists come to every year to get their taste of the royal presence in the United Kingdom. Well, today the Queen is not in residence here. She's in residence in Balmoral, her Scottish estate in Aberdeenshire, and she's been there since June, and it's a place she loves very much. Sadly, today we are reporting on the fact that her health is causing very significant concerns for the medical team, and that is the reason that we've seen very close members of the royal family, including the Queen's children, Charles and Anne and Andrew and Edward, making their way to Balmoral. They are there as we speak, as are some other members of the royal family, and they are probably being briefed, or maybe have been briefed by now, by the medical team on the Queen's condition, which suddenly overnight and into the morning started to cause far more concerns. We remember, of course, that just a couple of days ago, Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, was driven in through these gates and met the Queen and was granted an audience where she was invited to form a government. And the Queen at that point, although looking frail, was smiling and clearly very engaged in the process. And then yesterday, as part of the process of a new government, there was meant to be a meeting of the Privy Council. That's the senior politicians who advise the Queen in certain capacities, and the Queen was meant to hold that meeting virtually, if you like, in terms of video messaging, and that was felt to be unwise. The doctors advised the Queen not to engage in that online Privy Council meeting, and she was advised to rest. Now, most people who've been following royal events, and certainly my colleague Nicholas Witchell here and others, would say, well, that was a significant change of plan, not to have that Privy Council meeting, albeit online. And then by this morning, of course, the very worrying news that doctors were concerned about the Queen's health. So that treatment going on, it's happening at Balmoral. It's a very different place, isn't it, to the one on the right-hand side of the screen now, where we see the Queen leading the celebrations from that famous balcony of Buckingham Palace at the Jubilee, with millions of people crowded into this part of central London, all the way down from Admiralty Arch, all the way down the Mall, through the parks, the royal parks, to Buckingham Palace itself. A very happy day. And of course, with the Royal Marines and all the other wonderful military musicians in attendance, and the bands of the Household Division as well, who've been entertaining the royal family and the crowds for many, many years. Their stunning and sparkling military drill and their exceptional musicianship. The Queen's been a great supporter and a great ally of the armed forces over many years, and she is deeply respected and very, very well regarded and loved indeed by them, by all branches of the armed forces, as she is by millions of people around the country. So it's a nice image for us to enjoy on the right hand side, just happier times, if you like, than on the left hand side, that rather well, a bit of a grey, depressing site, a bit of a wet, low-key site, if you like, a rather depressing site at Balmoral, the wet roads leading into the estate itself. And we know, of course, what lies beyond the road. We know what lies at the end of that path. It is the castle, and it is the Queen being kept comfortable, being monitored 24/7 by an expert medical team. And all we can do is clearly wish the Queen well. We do that automatically and sincerely, but we are waiting too, I think it's fair to say, for further news from the medical team at Buckingham Palace and at Balmoral about the Queen's condition. And Nicholas Witchell is with me, our royal correspondent, who of course has been talking to us all afternoon about the events of this day. And this is the time of day, Nick, when lots of people will be maybe returning from work, they'll be joining us, they'll be aware of the reports, but they won't have seen lots of it. And I think that we're in the position where we are We're waiting, and we're right to be waiting without any rush and without any haste at all, waiting for the next update, if you like, now that we know the royal family has gathered there.
Yes, and of course Buckingham Palace has not been in the habit of giving updates, but I think on this occasion there will have to be something, given the level of concern that there is not just here but around the world. And we've seen the other members of the royal family arriving at Balmoral. That in itself is an indication, I think, of just how serious the situation is. So the mood, I think, is fairly described as sombre. The concern is considerable. So many politicians have talked about profound concern, and one must imagine that the Prime Minister and others are aware, have been appraised on Privy Council terms with whatever is the absolute situation. So we await any further news from Buckingham Palace, though I have to say that at the moment there is no indication that there is any further statement to be made. Looking, you made much of the images of the Queen on the balcony during the Jubilee celebrations remarkable, really, just 3 months ago. And when she appeared in that bright green coat, that was on the final day of the Jubilee celebrations on that Sunday. And it had been thought that perhaps she wouldn't make the journey from Windsor, but I think the Prince of Wales encouraged her to do so, and of course she did. And of course the crowds were absolutely delighted to see her. And I think she was terribly touched when they sang the national anthem. And yes, there was, I think, a sense that, something is drawing gradually to a close here. And I think that everybody was very touched on that occasion. That balcony that actually she first appeared on in 1927, when she was 1 year old. She was brought and shown to the crowd by her proud parents, the Duke of York, as he was then, her father and mother. So, yes, remarkable, really, and that is what monarchy is all about, the continuity, the span of years.
Yes.
The balcony, everything changes, but nothing changes. And that is why it is this source of reassurance, which so many millions of people find very comforting. So we must just continue to hope for the best, that there is some encouraging news, but at the same time, I think, given all the circumstances, we have to accept that, we just have to wait and see.
Yes, we do. Indeed, Nick. Thank you. Let's go from Balmoral then to Downing Street. Let's join Chris Mason, our political editor, who's joining us from there. Chris, do you have any update for us on what Downing Street's understanding of events is?
What I can tell you, Hugh, is that the Prime Minister is working as normal behind me in Downing Street. There are no plans for her to return to Scotland, to Balmoral. Of course, as we've been reflecting, she was there just a couple of days ago to become Prime Minister in that last public moment where we saw the Queen as the Prime Minister before Liz Truss. Boris Johnson had resigned, shortly followed by Liz Truss. We did hear from the Prime Minister at lunchtime shortly after the statement from Buckingham Palace in which Liz Truss said the whole country will be deeply concerned by the news from Buckingham Palace, and adding my thoughts and those of people across our United Kingdom are with Her Majesty the Queen and her family at this time. And here at Westminster, like I suspect in every corner of the UK, and indeed in many places around the world, a profound...
Chris, I apologise. I hate interrupting you, but I'm afraid we've got a dreadful problem on the mic. I suppose it's the elements interfering. It's the rain getting into cables and all kinds of things. So if we clear that up, Chris, I'll be back with you as soon as we can. Chris Mason there, our political editor. By the way, the US President Joe Biden has told Prime Minister Liz Truss that he and his wife Jill are thinking of the Queen amid deep concerns over the monarch's health. The White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said this. That's to say, the President and the First Lady's thoughts are solidly and squarely with the Queen today and with her family. The President has been briefed this morning and will be updated throughout the day concerning news out of the United Kingdom. So that's President Biden. I suppose, Nick, we can expect, we've had quite a bit already, but from the person who's the other side of the special relationship, you'd expect an expression of sincere concern. And given all the visits that the Queen has made to the States, and indeed how many state visits for presidents as she hosted in Downing Street over the years, well, that's one expression of concern that you would expect straight away.
Yep, and I think once again, it is quite normal for US presidents to be very keen to meet the Queen. They met at the G7 summit down in Cornwall, however many months ago that was. And of course, the Queen has met every US president bar one. She never met Lyndon Johnson, but I think Biden is the 14th US president. We're on to the 15th Prime Minister, 14th president, and I think there have been 6 or is it 7 popes that she's met, and which just again gives you a flavour of this remarkable life that she has led, meeting so many significant figures in world history, beginning, just after the war as a young princess, when her father was ailing and she was having to step in and assist him as a councillor of state. So, she has met just about anybody who is anybody, and yet she has never shared to the world any of her thoughts or appraisals of any of them. No. She has kept it all within either herself or within her family, and she has understood the fundamentals of the position that she has occupied for these 70 years, that she must be an uncontroversial figure, and she has absolutely understood the principles of a constitutional monarch. She learnt them really from her father, and she has continued in the style of her father, rather understated. And it was for that reason, of course, that she found the Duke of Edinburgh such a useful ally, because there was the difference in personality, difference in approach, and I think she owed so much to him, as we sensed in some of the things that she has said about him since his death.
It's interesting, owing, yes, of course, to Philip, but one senses as well that because of the abdication in 36, and then the fact that the course of her life changed, that her father really did take on the role of a very diligent tutor. And as I said earlier, Nick, I read somewhere when one of the royal household commented and said, look, in many ways you have to look at the reign of Elizabeth II as a continuation of the reign of George VI. And when you think about it in those terms, it makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. In style, they are so similar. And the Queen revered and loved her father deeply. She knew what a struggle it was for George VI to be the monarch during the difficult times of the Second World War. It was a huge strain. He was helped through it, of course, by the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, but also by his elder and I'm sure younger daughter, but they were a very close unit. And there is no doubt that the Queen learnt an awful lot from her father, rather in the same way as she has attempted to pass what she has learnt, not perhaps so much to Prince Charles, but to Prince William. And I think the Queen has taken a great deal of time to, as it were, tutor and pass on her wisdom and her approach and the principles that have governed her approach to monarchy to Prince William. And I think I interviewed him some years ago, and I asked him, whose template do you tend to follow? Is that the one of your father or the one of your grandmother? And rather to my surprise, he answered and said, well, I think my grandmother has got it absolutely right. And, in many ways, Prince William once said about being monarch, it's about setting an example, doing one's duty. It's about using your position for the good. It's about serving the country. Now, those, goodness me, those are the principles that encapsulate the approach that Queen Elizabeth has brought to the monarchy, to the British monarchy.
Nick, thank you. We're going to just bring in a guest, to the royal biographer and editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine, Ingrid Seward. Ingrid, it's good to have you with us, and we're grateful for your expert perspective on this as well today. As we follow the reports, and clearly we're reflecting on the deep concern that people have at this point, and the family have gathered there in Balmoral. What are your reflections at this stage?
Well, I think I feel very much what everybody is feeling. Obviously, this is a very poignant moment, and none of us quite know what's going to happen. But because the entire family, well, the entire nucleus of the family are gathered at Balmoral, and the fact that the Queen hasn't been sent to hospital speaks volumes. They obviously just want to keep her comfortable, have her family around her, and we just have to literally wait for news, whether it be good or bad. There's nothing more we can do. That is the situation, and it's very sad, especially as as you've said many times this afternoon, as we saw the Queen with Liz Truss only 48 hours ago, 2 days ago on Tuesday, and she looked so happy and in good spirits. I know she looked frail, but if you have mobility problems, you're going to have muscle loss, and so she's going to look frail. But it was really wonderful to see her, and it sort of gave us all hope. Well, there she'll be carrying on. But whatever has happened between now and then, we don't know. But all we can do is just hope very much for the best.
Indeed. I know that everyone watching will be sharing that, Ingrid, certainly. It's been a remarkable year, hasn't it, really? Because we've reported several times on the issues that have surrounded the Queen's health, the fact that she's not been able to undertake some engagements. And yet, when we think back to the Jubilee, which at one point we were very concerned about in terms of the Queen's ability to be present, we had 2 balcony appearances. We had a great sense of fun and celebration around the birthday parade to open events. The year has been one of some extremes, really, hasn't it? And as you say, it is just a matter of 48 hours ago since the Queen was obviously determined to fulfil her constitutional duty and invite Liz Truss to form a government. So it speaks volumes, really, about Her Majesty's commitment to the job.
It certainly does, and she hates letting people down, and she's always really, really wanted to get on with the job. So I think she's had a mentally probably quite a hard time. But I think this all started in October 21, when she was meant to be going to Ireland, and suddenly, I mean, the journalists and everyone were waiting for her, and suddenly she had to cancel. That was the beginning of her mobility problems, and I think it must have been difficult for her to have to say, well, take doctor's orders, which she always does, saying, I can't do this. And so that has been a recurring theme of her life ever since then. And I think, wonderful though she is and cheerful though she is, I think it must have been very difficult for her and very frustrating to feel that she's unable to carry out the duties which she's carried out all her life, which is another reason, I think, why Buckingham Palace have delayed it till the sort of 99th hour always to let us know whether or not the Queen is able to do certain things. I think it's because she was so determined to try and do them, but in the end couldn't. So it's been a difficult time for her.
Well, we'd like to think that we'll get a good progress report, Ingrid, but we must wait and see. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Ingrid Seward there, of Editor-in-Chief of Majesty magazine. If you're just joining us here on BBC News, this is our extended coverage today, following that bulletin from the Queen's medical team at lunchtime that her doctors are now very concerned about the state of her health. She's at Balmoral, her estate in Aberdeenshire. That is where she's being cared for. She's said to be in a comfortable condition. The doctors are there with her. She's having full 24/7 medical supervision, and in the last couple of hours the family has been gathering, and we've seen the children turning up, the rest of them, because Prince Charles was there already, and Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, and now they've been joined by the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex, and indeed by the Duke of Cambridge, her grandson, who's also arrived in the last hour or so. They landed at Aberdeen Airport about an hour and a half ago. So they're all there. And the Queen, who's been engaged in lots of duties in recent months and has been showing great spirit and great strength and a determination to really fulfil all those items in the diary. Well, today we had the news that she's not able to do that now. She's in a position where her health is causing a lot more concern. She's been made to feel comfortable, we're told. There's no mention of any hospital treatment or any other intervention elsewhere. All the care is being done at Balmoral. So following that statement, which was at 12:30 today, which is over 5 hours ago, there's been no word. All we've seen is the gathering of the close family members at Balmoral Castle itself. We are waiting to see if there'll be another statement. We don't know. But there may be a statement, and that is why we're staying on air as we approach 6 o'clock. And my colleague Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, is keeping a very, very close eye on these events, as you would imagine. And Nick, I've just summarised there where we are right now, but there'll be lots of people watching, wondering if it is realistic to expect some kind of statement now that the children have gathered, and maybe that they've had some kind of briefing from the doctors. So that's not an unreasonable thing to ask.
Well, I would have thought that that is absolutely what will need to happen. I think Buckingham Palace will have to say something, because there is such widespread and deep concern now, and the family has arrived at Balmoral, as you say, and therefore it would be logical for them to issue something, whether it is just a bulletin in terms of briefing us as to the state of her health, whether there has been an improvement, or whatever is the situation, because I think that as we approach the early evening now, it will be necessary for Buckingham Palace to say something. But I stress that I have not seen any indication that that is the case. That is just us sort of thinking that it would be logical and sensible and necessary.
Well, necessary because, of course, you know, there's no way to kind of overstate this. The affection for the Queen, the respect for the Queen, people's sense of loyalty to the Queen is such that it will be exercising people's minds.
Well, yes. You know, in all of our minds is the unimaginable almost, isn't it, really? And when that moment comes, and we have no reason to suppose that it is imminent, but people will find it an almost seismic moment, a seismic scale of shock when that moment comes. And I'm not in any way suggesting that it is about to come, but we are, let's be just candid about it. We've seen the facts as they have emerged today. We have seen the family gathering. They haven't rushed up to Balmoral without very good reason. And one must suppose that whatever it is that they have now been briefed about, Buckingham Palace will feel the need to share that with the rest of the nation and indeed the Commonwealth at some point this evening.
One imagines, because as you said earlier, Nick, we're talking about a family. It's the royal family, and we're dealing here with Her Majesty the Queen. But it's family, and it's a mother and a grandmother and a great-grandmother whose health we are talking about. And I imagine that they have gathered with her to offer comfort.
Yep, one must assume that. And it is only, I can't do it in my head, 20 months, is it, or since the Duke of Edinburgh's death,
yes.
Rather less than that.
Yes.
So, you know, this is a family which has suffered one death quite recently, and which is now having to deal with the illness and the declining health, as we understand it at the moment, of, as you say, their mother or their grandmother. It is perfectly possible that she will recover from this, or not perhaps recover, but that she will get over whatever issue it is that has caused the doctors to speak in the way that they have. So we must again stress that we don't know what the true situation is. We are merely anticipating and expecting that the palace will feel it necessary to say something. But as you say, Hugh, at the heart of this is a family which is providing comfort to the Queen, and one must hope that that is the situation that is taking place within Balmoral Castle at the moment.
Nick, thank you. Well, the time is a minute past 6 o'clock, and if you're joining us here on BBC News, we are reporting the latest on the state of the Queen's health, because Her Majesty is under medical supervision at Balmoral Castle, after doctors became concerned for her health. A statement from Buckingham Palace released earlier this afternoon said that the Queen, who's 96, was placed under supervision after further evaluation, they said, but they then went on to say she remains comfortable. Now, the BBC understands that all 4 of the Queen's children are now at the royal estate in Aberdeenshire. 4 senior royals arrived at Balmoral in the past hour. The Land Rover being driven by the Duke of Cambridge. Alongside him was Prince Andrew, Duke of York, and then the Earl and Countess of Wessex also with them. We are told that Prince Harry is also on his way, but he wasn't travelling with this party, and he's not travelling either with his wife Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. She's not travelling to Balmoral. There's been lots of reaction, as you'd imagine, lots of expressions of alarm during the day. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, saying that the whole country would be deeply concerned by the news, and she said that her thoughts and those of everyone in the UK were currently with Her Majesty and with members of the royal family. Let's just remind ourselves, just 2 days ago, the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, was officially asked by the Queen to form a government. Liz Truss became the 15th Prime Minister of the Queen's reign when she visited the Queen there at Balmoral. So that is a summary of where we stand right now at 3 minutes past 6, and our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is with me, and Nick and I are keeping a very close eye on all the developments, watching the comings and goings there at Balmoral too. What would you say to viewers at this point, Nick?
I would say that I think once again, in the absence of any hard facts, that the images, I think, are now starting to tell the story. I was looking closely at that picture that we just showed of the Wessexes in the back of that vehicle. It's the first time we've seen the close-up of Prince Edward, or the Earl of Wessex, and Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. I thought they looked very sombre. I thought in particular she looks very sombre.
Yeah.
I think people... Every individual must look at that photograph and draw their own conclusions. Yes. I'm not going to assist anybody in attempting to draw any conclusion, but I think she looks, sombre.
Yes.
Let's leave it at that.
Yes.
I think, they're arriving there at the gates of Balmoral Castle after dashing up from London, from their home at Bagshot, having been presumably summoned at some point this morning and briefed about whatever it is that has occurred at Balmoral Castle, and the family has come together and they have got on a RAF plane and they have flown straight to Aberdeen and then straight out to Balmoral. This against the background of the Queen's doctors having become concerned about her health. So that is the situation. We have heard the statements from senior politicians who will have been briefed on Privy Council terms. Current and previous Prime Ministers will know what the situation is, and I think again we just read into their statements a general sense of profound concern.
Well, that statement, Nick, of course, came from Buckingham Palace, and these are the images of the palace where there have been some crowds gathering during the course of the afternoon, because of course the news has been getting around and people have been at the railings there just waiting to see if there's any announcement, waiting to see if there's any news of the Queen's health. And some of those, of course, will be visitors to London. Others will be people who live in London or indeed are visiting London from other parts of the UK and beyond. How unusual, Nick, was the statement that was released by Buckingham Palace earlier today?
Extremely. They have made a point of not saying anything. As we've been discussing this afternoon, they insist that the Queen is entitled to patient confidentiality. They will not engage in a commentary about her health. So after telling us back in October, on October the 20th, that she was cancelling that visit to Northern Ireland and she had been advised by her doctors to rest, their statements have been few and far between. We have had briefings, if one can call them that the episodic mobility issues have from time to time reared their head and have prevented her from attending some of these major state events, the state opening of Parliament and so on and so forth. But they have not gone beyond that. They have not addressed the suspicion, and it's been a pretty widespread suspicion, that there has been some underlying condition in addition to the mobility problem. So for them to come out, having said last night that she was unable to chair the virtual Privy Council meeting, that it was necessary and that she was tired after the events with the incoming Prime Minister, that she was needing to rest last night, then this morning to hear the statement from Buckingham Palace. Yes, I think we can all quite reasonably and justifiably say that clearly something has happened that is giving rise to all of this concern.
With that, let's go to Downing Street then and talk to our political editor, Chris Mason. And Chris, we've already seen the image of the Queen smiling just 2 days ago, looking frail but smiling as she greeted Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister. What's going on in Downing Street today? The Prime Minister working there and obviously being fully informed about events at Balmoral.
That's right, Hugh, yeah. So Liz Truss is working from Downing Street this evening. There are no plans for her to travel to Scotland, to Balmoral. As we've been reporting in the last few hours, several members of the wider royal family have been making that journey. It is, of course, as you say, just a couple of days ago that Liz Truss was there and was greeted by the Queen, had that audience with the Queen in which she was invited to form a government and to become Prime Minister. Just a matter of moments before, the Queen had a final audience as Prime Minister with Boris Johnson, in which he tendered his resignation. And it was that reminder of the key role that the Queen plays right at the heart of the British political system, detached from democracy and yet somehow overseeing it and performing these central roles of state when governments come and governments go. And that announcement last night that she wasn't able to take part in that virtual meeting of the Privy Council, that's a gathering of senior ministers who meet in her presence regularly, an indication of her frailty. And in the last few months there have been those signs, haven't there, of her increasing age. So, for instance, the audiences that Prime Ministers have with the Queen and hugely cherish, when you read the memoirs of Prime Ministers, they hugely cherish that opportunity they have, that discreet opportunity for a chat in private with the Queen, weighted and freighted as she is with all of the experience that she has meeting heads of state and government over decade after decade after decade. Traditionally, and for many years, they would happen in person at Buckingham Palace. In recent years, not least because of the pandemic, but continuing after that as well, those audiences happening remotely, again to account for those episodic mobility problems as reported by the Palace in recent months and years, and an acknowledgement of her increasing frailty and age. And even in the last 48 hours, a reminder here at Westminster of the role of the Queen in the formation of a government. Not just that moment that we so widely reported the other day and Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister, but also the appointment of ministers. When ministers are formally appointed, they are done so formally by the Queen. They are ministers of the Crown. So plenty here at Westminster, reflecting very profoundly and reflecting that profound concern that exists around the country and in many places around the world about the Queen's health this evening, so conscious as they are of that bind that exists constitutionally between Parliament, government and the royal household, the monarch personified for so long by the Queen.
Indeed, Chris, and it is one of those moments, and let's hope we get good news from Balmoral, but it's one of those moments when people do reflect on the kind of constitutional arrangement that exists and which the Queen has made work. She's really helped to oil the wheels of that constitutional arrangement, which lots of constitutional experts say, is not a normal arrangement. It's not an arrangement which on paper should be working. But of course, this notion of the Crown in Parliament as the constitutional monarchy is framed is one that today we reflect on because, of course, there is this axis, the axis of importance and continuity which stretches from the palace to Parliament and to the executive itself.
Yes, and we see this, don't we, when there are those moments, the state opening of Parliament, colloquially described as the Queen's speech, where the Queen comes along. She wasn't able to attend, of course, just a few months ago, but comes along to Parliament and sits there delivering out loud the government's words, saying what the government is planning to do in its legislative programme in the months and years ahead. And there's a particular moment in that ceremony, you may recall this, where the door is slammed in the face of an official called Black Rod, acknowledging the independence of the democratic House of Commons in that constitutional arrangement where the Queen, the head of state, sits at the top of it, Parliament below it. That point about the head of state, a striking one as well, Hugh. I've travelled recently to the G7 summit in Bavaria and on to the NATO Defence Alliance summit in Madrid. And part of the formulation of the language of those events is that they are gatherings of heads of state and government. And that matters because, of course, in the UK system, we have a head of government in Liz Truss, the Prime Minister. We have a head of state in Her Majesty the Queen. And that distinction between the two so pivotal to how the UK system operates.
Chris, thank you again. Chris Mason, our political editor there with the latest for us in Downing Street. Well, from Downing Street, let's go to Windsor, because Windsor, of course, dominated by the great castle. And Windsor, I think it's fair to say, as our understanding goes, is the Queen's favourite residence, though she loves Balmoral as well. But at Windsor, our correspondent Helena Wilkinson has been there for us today. Looks slightly better weather-wise than it was earlier, Helena. What is your sense there of the way that the local community in Windsor, which has such a close bond with the royal family because of the proximity there, well, what's your sense of what people are saying in Windsor itself?
Yes, absolutely, Hugh. And for those who don't know, Windsor Castle is right in the centre of Windsor. Just down the road is the high street full of shops. And local people, residents in Windsor, very much view the Queen as one of their neighbours, as a local resident. In previous years, she was often seen in the Great Park around here. We've spoken to a number of people here on the high street, some emotional at the news of the Queen's health, and also many people just anxious to hear how she is. We haven't had another update from the palace since the one we got at just after 12:30 this afternoon. Lots of visitors coming out of the castle gates here. Some of them told us that they had heard the news from inside the grounds, others emerging not having heard. We know, of course, that the Queen spent much of the last 2.5 years here at the castle. As you mentioned, Hugh, this is perhaps her most favourite royal residence. It's a lot of green space around here. It's somewhere where she loves to be. And she spent the last years of her husband's life, the Duke of Edinburgh, during lockdown. They remained here together, spending day after day together. They celebrated their 73rd wedding anniversary in November 2020. She, of course, made that trip, which is traditional for the Queen, to spend the summer months at Balmoral. She left here at Windsor Castle in July, and the Queen would traditionally return here to the castle in October. But the sense this evening, Hugh, here, the feeling amongst locals and also visitors here, tourists here, there are some who've gathered just a bit down from where we are, is one of concern, deep concern about the Queen, wanting to know how she is, and anxiety. So I think everyone really is waiting for another statement from the palace to find out exactly how Her Majesty is.
Well, we await to see if that statement comes, Helena. Thank you very much. Helena Wilkinson there with the latest at Windsor. And of course, Windsor is where the Queen spent so much of the lockdown period, much of that with the late Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. But in July this year, the Queen decided that she really did want to maintain the tradition of spending lots of the summer at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire, in the glorious countryside there. And of course, Balmoral Castle is one of the favourite homes of the Queen, where she's spent so many happy times during her long life, going back to her childhood, and it brings back lots of memories of happy times with her parents and her sister Margaret, and of course with her family when they were young, and then growing up with Prince Philip as well, as they enjoyed the countryside and the picnics and the barbecues around Balmoral. So it's a place of great happiness for the Queen, and that's the reason she decided that she really did, despite her mobility problems and health issues, she wanted to leave Windsor in July and go to Balmoral as usual. And she is, of course, a stickler for tradition. So Buckingham Palace there on the right, very much seen as the office, if you like. That's where the working quarters are. Windsor, not too far away to the west, is really the kind of favourite home, the main home, where lots of work is also done. And then, of course, we have the other residences, Balmoral, which we are familiar with in summer, and then, of course, Sandringham in the east of England, and there are a few others too. Of course, there's Holyrood House in Edinburgh. So we are looking today at news from Balmoral. That's our focus today. It's not Buckingham Palace, really. It's Balmoral, and that is where the Queen is being kept comfortable by the team of doctors who are there and who have just put that unusual statement out earlier today. Unusual because it was rather forthcoming, saying that they were concerned. They were now concerned about the state of the Queen's health, and that she was comfortable at Balmoral, that some of the family now who've arrived there to see their mother, in the case of Prince Charles and Princess Anne, and Andrew and Edward, and then, of course, a grandson in the form of Duke of Cambridge. They're all there, and we imagine that they've been talking to the doctors there and have had their briefing, and one imagines that they are with the Queen, keeping her company and making sure that she's as comfortable as possible. Now, at Balmoral is my colleague James Cook, who's the BBC's Scotland editor. And James, could you bring us up to date, please, on what's been going on there?
Yes, Hugh. No sense of drama here, no sense of panic, a sense instead of a well-rehearsed plan quietly swinging into action. For most of the afternoon, it was relatively calm here. The rain teemed down, leaving the purple heather around this estate sodden. Every few minutes or so, another photographer, another reporter would cross Isambard Kingdom Brunel's bridge across the River Dee and make their way here to the gates of Balmoral. And then at 5:05, a flurry of flashbulbs as senior members of the royal family swept past us. Prince William driving a Range Rover, Prince Andrew next to him, and in the back, Prince Edward and Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. I could see grim faces. Certainly Andrew, I saw clearly, very grim-faced Andrew as they drove past and into this estate, which, of course, has been one of the favourite places, if not the favourite place of the Queen for many, many decades of her reign. An estate, a 50,000-acre estate dating back in terms of its association with the royal family to Queen Victoria, the castle here built for her in the 1850s. And of course a place where we know the Queen has many fond memories of spending time with her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, not least because the photograph that was released by the family on his death was a photograph of the two of them together in the hills on this estate.
James, just a thought here about the Queen's relationship with Scotland as well, because of course we're at a time where there's been a lot of debate about the future shape of the United Kingdom. The Queen, of course, represents the solid element of continuity, and that's an interesting thing for us to reflect on, given her great affection for Balmoral and indeed for Scotland.
Yes, this is surely a monarch who personifies the union of the crowns of 1603 as much as she does anything else. The constancy that we talk about that applies to her reign actually goes way back before her reign in terms of the royal family's relationship with Scotland, predating the Act of Union, the Union of the Parliaments in 1707. And indeed, the Queen has been a constant figure associated with that union of the crowns. Not, it has to be said, Hugh, always without controversy. And the Silver Jubilee speech, which the Queen gave in 1977 at Westminster when she talked about the benefits union had conferred at a time when the Labour Party was proposing to devolve power to Wales and to Scotland, proposals that were ultimately defeated. That certainly raised eyebrows. Eyebrows were raised in 2014 when the Queen, attending Crathy Kirk, just along from the gates of Balmoral here, talked about people considering the future, thinking very carefully about the future as they decided how to vote in the referendum on independence, which the people of Scotland ultimately rejected. The palace, of course, strongly denied that there was anything wrong with that comment, said it was a perfectly sensible thing to say, to urge people to think very carefully about such a serious issue. And of course, there is deep affection for the Queen in parts of Scotland. It is fair to say that if you look at the polling, the monarchy is not as popular north of the border as it is south of the border, but the Queen is certainly more popular than the monarchy in Scotland, and that is certainly reciprocated on her behalf. She's talked of her deep and abiding affection for this nation.
And a thought, James, as well about the place that Balmoral plays in the great royal landscape, if you like. You've mentioned the fact, and we mentioned earlier, the fact that the Queen has a great affection for it, and its heritage goes back to Queen Victoria's time. We're talking about Aberdeenshire, which of course is lots of it, very, very beautiful. The landscape there is magnificent. And as you say, very significant that rather lovely image of the Queen and the Duke, released when the Duke died, was indeed in the hills above Balmoral, on this enormous estate that the Queen has there.
Yes, that's right. And the Queen has been coming here regularly with her family for the summer and into the early autumn, year after year after year. It's very clear that this place is somewhere for which she holds extremely deep affection. We just see another police car going through the gates there of Balmoral Estate. Yes, Hugh, you're right. I mean, there is definitely an affinity. I mean, if you look back through the newsreel footage, back through the years, here she was in the 1960s, buying an ice cream for one of the young princes just along the road in one of the local shops. One of the few places, really, where I'm not saying the Queen routinely walks up and down the streets of Ballater and Braemar, but it would be a place where she would not be troubled by people locally if she were to do so, because people are very used to seeing senior members of the royal family. Indeed, I remember one occasion somebody telling me that just outside these gates here, they were driving along and there was a car waiting with its indicator on to turn into the gates, and as they drove past they realised it was none other than Queen Elizabeth at the wheel.
Well, James, thank you very much. James Cook with some nice memories there of the Queen and life in Balmoral. But today we are reflecting on the state of the Queen's health, sadly, and we're just waiting to see whether Buckingham Palace or the officials at Balmoral make another statement, having said at lunchtime that the Queen's doctors are very concerned about the state of the Queen's health, that she is comfortable, that they had no more to say at that point, but they felt it necessary to convey the fear and the anxiety that was being felt. And that is why, of course, we've now seen the Duke of Cambridge, Duke of York, the Earl and Countess of Wessex and some others making their way to Balmoral. They've arrived there. The Prince of Wales already there, and the Duchess of Cornwall too. The Princess Royal is there, so the family, the family is gathered, and we're told that the Duke of Sussex, Harry, is on his way, but he wasn't with the party that arrived a short while ago. Watching the images with me, Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, and Nick James there was underlining the special place that Balmoral holds, because really some people may be wondering why the Queen in September is in Balmoral. Why is she not back in Windsor or even in Buckingham Palace? But it's important to underline that that's normal. That's what she does.
And she, of course, she loves to have the routine, to have the sense of confidence that you get from an unchanging routine. And so much of her year never changes. So, yes, I think the annual trip up to Balmoral is really very important to her. And it is somewhere where she feels very comfortable, very much at ease, somewhere that she has known all her life. So the time is approaching 6:30 now, isn't it? I was struck by what James Cook was saying about the grim faces that he noticed on the faces of the members of the royal family as they drove into Balmoral Castle a short time ago. We are still waiting to see if there is something from Buckingham Palace. There is nothing to report on that front at the moment, but of course that could change at a moment's notice. The situation, as we understand it at the moment, continues to be that there is widespread and deep concern about the health of the Queen. Following the statement by her doctors this morning, clearly there has been some episode which has occurred overnight, which has given rise to that concern, and which prompted the doctors and Buckingham Palace to put out a statement indicating that there is concern about the Queen's health. Members of her family have broken off and travelled to Scotland. Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall were already there. They have travelled across to Balmoral Castle, where they have also been joined by the Princess Royal. And other members of the royal family, 4 members of the royal family, have travelled up from London on an RAF flight. The Duke of Cambridge, the Duke of York, and the Earl and Countess of Wessex.
There is expectation now, clearly, Nick, if we look at the images here of Buckingham Palace, and the area in front of it dominated, of course, by the Queen Victoria Memorial at this end of the Mall. But crowds now starting to gather at those gates, where announcements in the past have been made, of course, about all kinds of things and events in the royal family's life. But I think today reflects really a crowd which is starting to gather, just basically expressing concern and just hoping for the best, is how I'd put it.
Yes, I think that is the fairest way we can put it, Hugh. Millions of people here and elsewhere will be hoping for the best, but they will be, I think, now fearing the worst and perhaps preparing for the worst. But we must continue to hope that whatever news we get from Buckingham Palace will indicate that things are okay at Balmoral. But I think that is as much really as we can say at this stage. There is great concern. That concern has been expressed by politicians at the most senior level, and they will know what the true situation is. They will have been briefed, and they will have briefed each other on Privy Council terms. So I think that that is the fairest indication that we can give to our viewers, both here and around the world at this stage, that there is, as we keep saying, there is profound concern, there is deep concern. But at this stage, we do not have any further news from Buckingham Palace.
Nick, we're just looking at these images here because, of course, they are really reflecting people's deep alarm and deep concern about the fact that the Queen is extremely unwell, and, of course, that we are expecting the news from Balmoral that she's having treatment, or that, indeed, they are unable to help Her Majesty anymore. A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The Palace has just issued this statement. It says the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. To recap on the statement, the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King, that is Charles, and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Her Majesty was 96 years old. She became Queen on the 6th of February 1952 on the death of her father, King George VI. She heard the news while staying at a game lodge in Kenya at the age of 25, and her coronation in Westminster Abbey was watched by more than 20 million people. She was married to Prince Philip for 73 years until his death in April of 2021. And Charles, their first child, was born in 1948. He now becomes the new king. In 2015, Her Majesty passed Queen Victoria to become the longest reigning monarch in British history. And in February 2022, we saw the 70th anniversary of her becoming Queen. And she made more than 250 visits to Commonwealth countries and was head of state in Australia and Canada and New Zealand. Winston Churchill was Britain's Prime Minister when she came to the throne, and Liz Truss was her 15th Prime Minister. The BBC is interrupting its normal programmes to bring you an important announcement. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the Palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. BBC Television is broadcasting this special programme reporting the death of Her Majesty the Queen. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.